This is APMagNet.
Hello from Bangkok, and welcome to our first APMagNet talk show. I'm Alan Dow from the International Labour Organization. APMagNet is an online community of professionals where they can come together and share their views on migration-related issues. Today the topic will be social protection for migrant workers. Well, joining me in the studio are Valerie Schmidt, an ILO Senior Social Security Specialist based in Bangkok, but working across the Asia-Pacific region. Celine Perron-Bista, Chief Technical Advisor of the ILO's ASEAN Unemployment Insurance Project. And Manola Abeya, a former Director of the ILO's International Migration Program. Thanks to all of you for being with us today. And thanks to you too for joining us from wherever you are, at your office or in your home or on your mobile device, because we will ask you to also join in this debate. After you've heard from our experts, you'll be able to join the discussion online at www.apmagnet, that's APMagnet.ilo.org, and take part in the discussion. The discussion will continue until March 22nd, and after that, there will be a summary of what everyone had to say. Well, that brings me to the first question, and I'd like to direct that to you, Manolo. Given your background as a migration expert, why are so many migrants choosing to now remain within the region? What's driving this? And tell us about some of the consequences and challenges that are faced by both the migrants themselves, but also the policymakers in trying to deal with this.
Thank you, Alan. The forces driving migration in this region are fairly easy to understand because the people are much better informed about what's going on thanks to modern communication. They know the opportunities that lie within the countries and also across the border. There is also the factor of reduced cost of travel. And most importantly, the fact that in spite the growth of many countries in the region, the growth has been very imbalanced, and there has been a great deal more disparities of incomes and wages. For example, if you are an Indonesian going to Singapore, you can experience a 15 times increase in your expected earnings. And not to mention going to Japan, for example, where you can get even more. If you're a Vietnamese, the differential is about 36 times if you go to Japan. So you can imagine the compulsion of how you can improve your lifestyle and that of your family if you move across borders. The reasons why this will be persisting for a long time is in the demographics of the region. You have very low fertility rates and already affecting slowing down the growth of the labor force in a number of countries, notably Korea, Japan, Singapore too, and very soon Thailand as well. So you have a slowing growth of labor force, which would translate into slower economic growth, and that will affect of course, the welfare of and conditions of life. So there will be a compulsion for both the countries that are short of labor to bring in more labor. And as long as there are differentials, people will be motivated to go across the border.
I guess there are problems that the migrants are facing when they cross these borders. What are some of those?
Indeed, migrant workers are always at the mercy of sovereignty. The moment they cross borders, they kind of rights that they enjoy at home are not guaranteed when they cross the border, especially if you're an undocumented or irregular migrant. There are many legislations that exclude non-nationals from coverage of social protection measures, especially in Social Security. So there are considerable disadvantages and contingencies and risks from the time you consider migrating and get a recruitment agent to bring you across the border, to the time when you face an employer who may not inform you about what kind of work and conditions you're content with. You may disagree with your employer, may lose your job. And then, of course, you have these problems of companies going bankrupt and all sorts of risks like that. So the need for national authorities in this region to consider the particular circumstances of migrants very, very crucial. Because I think everybody recognizes that the best way to protect your national workers is to protect migrant workers.
Okay, well, I guess in general then it seems that we're talking about vulnerabilities of migrants due to a lack of systems and safeguards when they cross the borders looking for work. You know, we've interviewed some migrant workers in Thailand, originally from Myanmar, and they've explained their difficulties to us, and let's have a listen to what they had to say.
When the accident happened, I ran to my brother for help. At 10 a.m., I was taken to Pak Nang Hospital and I blacked out there. I regained consciousness at 4 p.m. with my hand bandaged and only my thumb left. I spent 5 days in the hospital. The factory owner drove me home from the hospital. He told me he would buy me some food, but he gave me nothing and no compensation.
We come from another country. Therefore, we have to depend on the business owner to deal with the Ministry of Labour to arrange social security benefits for us. We already paid for our passports and other necessary documents. We simply want to have our labour rights respected. We want to enjoy similar social security benefits as those enjoyed by Thai workers.
Please let me speak from my heart. I only made it to the 4th grade at school. Our family was so poor. We only had 1 meal per day. My father's health is not good either. Back home, I didn't even have any shoes, and I have 4 younger siblings too. I wanted to finish my own education, but I couldn't. So I was working to help pay for my brother's education. But now, with my injury, I can't work for anyone. That's why I'm waiting for compensation.
Well, pretty compelling stories there from what both of them had to say. Valerie, let me turn to you now. As a specialist in social security programs, let me ask you, why aren't migrant workers, or indeed the majority of the population of Asia, getting better access to social security benefits?
Yes, Alan, I agree with your statement. Social protection is not yet a reality for most population in Asia. The ILO estimates that only 1/3 of the population has access to pension, old age pension, and 1 in 5 persons have really coverage in case of accidents, work-related accidents. And 1 in 10 have access to unemployment benefits. So, as you can see, there is still a gap in terms of social security coverage in the region, and this affects, of course, migrant workers and the rest of the population. As far as migrant workers are concerned, you have different types, of course, as Manolo was explaining. Some of them, they pass the borders with documents. They are already there. They have the more or less the certainty that they will get a contract or a formal employment contract in a formal sector enterprise. In some countries, they will be entitled to social security. It means that their employer has the obligation by law to register them under the social security schemes. This is the case, for instance, in Thailand. If you migrate to Thailand and you to have a formal sector job in a factory, for instance, you will be entitled to social security. However, this doesn't mean that they will indeed receive the benefits for many reasons. For instance, if you are, as Manolo was explaining, if you're enterprise closes for different reasons, or if you have a problem with your employer, etc., you have to leave the country because of migration regulations within 7 days in many cases, and therefore you don't have the time to claim for your benefits, and so you have to leave the country without having received the guarantee that you will receive these benefits once you are home. So it means that some migrant workers may contribute and be registered under social security schemes and never get their benefits. So this is the case of countries where they are included in the social security law, but in some countries they are not even included under the social insurance law, which means that we still have a lot of efforts to do to ensure that they are also included under the social insurance law. And these are only for the formal sector migrant workers. As Manolo was explaining, there are many migrant workers that just cross the border within ASEAN without having any documents, without having any formal jobs or formal perspective. And for these workers, usually there's nothing in terms of social protection.
We've also, I mean, just going back to your point, we've also heard stories, haven't we, in the media quite a bit about employers who will take advantage of this, of these sort of immigration loopholes and either close their factory, shut down their business, or just fire their workers and then phone the immigration police to come and take them away and obviously not pay them. So there are lots of abuses that need to be tackled, and where do we start? Hard question to ask, I guess. Celine, let's come to you with that, with the next question, because I wanted to just ask you to tell us a bit about what's happening in ASEAN. I know this is a bit more to what Valerie was saying about social protection of migrants. Do you think the experience of some of these other countries in Asia, I mean, there are, for example, there's Japan, Korea. Do you think the experience of some of these countries, there could be some learning there for ASEAN?
Yeah, thank you very much, Alan, to bring this discussion at a regional level. I think it's very important when we talk about social security for migrant workers that we also find mechanisms to encourage cooperation between countries. It's true that more and more countries are aware among the ASEAN countries of the situation in terms of social protection of the migrant workers. Indeed, it's expected, or it can be expected, that with the ASEAN integration by 2015, that we will see an increased movement of population, cross-border movement within the countries of the ASEAN. Just to give you an example, last November, in November 2012, the royal government of Cambodia strongly pushed for an ASEAN integration with a human face, which means that this integration should ensure that all ASEAN people, including migrant workers, have access to social welfare and protection. And you're right, by giving the example of other countries like Japan and Korea, we all know that countries are at different level of development, and this is also true within ASEAN region. It's not one block of ASEAN countries. Some ASEAN countries are already well equipped with social security schemes. Some others are still at the premise of the development. So in such situation, from where we start, what is important, if we want to improve protection of migrant workers, but also the protection of the whole population, is to start with implementing at least a minimum social protection floor. Even before starting talking about the bilateral agreements within countries, we need to ensure that these persons, these migrant workers, have access to some kind of protection. As Valerie was mentioning, in some countries it's still a very complex reality. To support the ASEAN member states to reach this kind of protection for migrant workers, the ILO is working with them on proposing a three-tier strategy. To start first with assessment of what is the situation in terms of social protection, including also an assessment of on whether the migrant workers are included in the scheme, to refer to what Valerie was saying. And the second step will be to continue efforts to reinforce social security schemes. and to ensure that the extension is provided to the better coverage of the population and also with higher level of benefits. And only once we have those systems in place, only once we have at least a minimum social protection in the country, then we can start negotiating bilateral agreements or even in the future regional agreements.
The first challenge to policymakers is, I think, is to change the mindset of their citizenry about the problems. There is a great deal of negative thinking about migrant workers in this region. They are seen to not only take away jobs, but to cause crime. And there's a need for us together to work to bring the facts and inform the public of the real situation. Many of these workers are contributing very significantly to the improvement of the conditions of life in many countries of the region. It is important for that kind of climate to exist before you can have legislation, because there's a lot of change in legislation you need in order to include migrant workers in many of these schemes, and that will not come if you have negative attitudes about migration. Once you get over that hurdle, there are the technical issues involved, because there are all kinds of situations that migrants are in, and the portability of benefits is a very difficult problem. Even in the most advanced countries, they have posed dilemmas on how to go about doing this. You need a lot of cooperation between at the governmental levels and a machinery to give substance to the law by enabling the migrant workers who return back to their home countries to enjoy benefits of old age benefits, or if you're injured, to be able to continue getting employment injury compensation.
Let's just for our viewers and people listening who may not know what we mean by portability, we're talking about a migrant worker goes to a country, performs duties as an employee for several years, should be able to take back an unemployment insurance benefit or some kind of pension benefit portable back to his or her own country.
Well, in principle, if there are agreements between the countries, there should be at least an entitlement, a legal entitlement to benefit from it. The problem is when you are not a regular worker, if you're undocumented, or in some cases if you're working in an informal economy, you don't get those benefits, even if you're in industrialized countries. Or in some cases, if the country where you go to retire is not a part of a general multilateral agreement, you might fall outside of the sphere of the potential benefit.
Valerie, let's just come back to you on that point, because I know you've been doing some work in East Asia. Tell me a little bit about some of the social security work that you've been doing.
So as Celine was explaining a little bit, we have a whole methodology that we have developed in all these countries. Of course, we first promote the social security, social protection conventions and recommendations. This is the heart or the core of our work. We also do assessments of the social security situation in all the countries to try to know whether social protection is a reality for all new share of the population, or according to different conventions and recommendations that we have. The ILO member states have adopted a number of recommendations and conventions in the past years, and the most recent one on social security is the recommendation number 202 on the social protection floor. Through this recommendation, ILO member states recognize that social security is a basic human right, and that all the member states should start establishing a nationally defined social protection for all their residents and all the children living in the different countries, which means that also migrant workers should be covered by this minimum level of social protection.
And when we talk about social protection floor, this is up to each country to make its own definition?
Yes, it's up to each country, but there are some guiding principles, and there is also a framework that helps or guides the countries to establish or to design these social protection floors. Each floor should at least ensure that all the people have access to 4 guarantees. One of them is access to health care. The second one is income security for children, which means that all children should have enough income so that they can go to school, have nutrition and care. The third guarantee is income security for the working age, which means that if you are disabled or unemployed, you should have access to a sort of minimum level of living so that you can survive. And you should also have access to appropriate employment opportunities through skills development and all these things. And the last guarantee is for the elderly. All the elderly should live decent lives by having, for instance, minimum pensions. So as you can see from this very brief description of the 4 guarantees of the social protection floor, we are far from having a social protection floor in Asia, and for the overall population, and particularly for migrant workers. So there is still a lot of things to be done.
There's a long way to go, isn't there? I mean, Celine, let's just come back to you on that, because just speaking specifically about ASEAN, it looks like there is a long road to go in ASEAN, doesn't it?
Yeah, but as Manolo said as well, I think we have to be optimistic. If we want to continue this work, we have to believe that we're not starting from nothing. I think what is very important is there's a commitment across the region, and we have to be here also to support this commitment. It's true that we have many challenges. The first one, obviously, is if there's nothing in the country for the national, then it will be hard to have protection for migrant workers and their family. Then you have countries, as Valerie mentioned, like Thailand, where you have already a good system in place, supported by legal framework. Then you have to make sure that those legal framework will not de facto exclude the migrant workers. And this you can find in other countries in the region, where it's only for their citizens. So for migrant workers, access will not be possible. It can be for health services, it can be also for pension. But as also Manolo mentioned very well, it's even if you have the structure, even if you have the legal framework, the laws, the principle, then the implementation is another challenge, and a big challenge.
So let's think about the things that are working. What is working so far? How in this region are we progressing toward this 2015 goal of labor migration?
Yes, in Thailand, the government is very proactive to provide better protection, at least for healthcare, to the migrant workers, even those who are not documented, who are not registered under the Social Security Office. There is a registration process that has been established and that allows migrants who are not registered to become registered. And so this is, I think, really a strong move towards a better protection of migrant workers, at least for healthcare. And also what is interesting in Thailand is that Thailand has developed a huge scope of knowledge in terms of developing social health protection schemes, because Thailand, as you know, has a universal healthcare scheme now for all their citizens, and is ready to help other neighboring countries, particularly Laos, Cambodia and Myanmar, to develop similar systems, because they understand that you cannot have ASEAN integration if you have too big differences of development in social security. Otherwise, Thailand will attract a lot of people who come to Thailand to get cured. Yeah, so Thailand cannot afford that in the long run. So the idea of ASEAN integration is that little by little all the countries should establish higher levels of social protection so that you have less differences between the different countries and more uniformity.
Manolo, let's come back to you. I'd like to get, as we sort of come toward the close of this discussion, I'd like to get your ideas or your predictions for what policymakers, employers, and I guess trade unions, the ILO's core constituency at least, need to do to see, and civil society, but together, what do they need to do to make this the whole system safer, better managed labor migration across the region? And I'll just add to that, if they do take the steps that you think they need to take, could you sort of describe how you see the ASEAN region 15 or 20 years down the road?
Well, the tripartite constituents have definitely important roles to play in the formulation of appropriate policies and programs for migrant workers. The good thing is that we have now considerable gains in different countries for the involvement of the trade unions in this effort. Malaysian Trade Union Council, for example, is very active in protection of migrants. There is the ASEAN Trade Union Council, which work together, and they recognize this as an important issue. So they are very much on the ball. I think we need a lot more work on the employer side. The employers are the first ones to gain the most from migration, so it should not be too difficult to convince them to help. But so far we have not had much input from this side on the improvement of policies. But I think that is coming. I think what is clear is as countries prosper economically in this region, and don't forget this is a $2 trillion economy, that the whole ASEAN, for example, with 550 million people, that's a fairly large chunk of the population of the world. And they're growing very rapidly, and what they're capable of in spreading the benefits of growth is quite considerable. The Cebu Declaration on the Rights of Migrant Workers should be mentioned because it is an important milestone in the protection of migrant workers in our region. And I think it sets an agenda for what countries should do. It provides a reference point on where countries' legislation should aim at to improve the possibilities. I'm optimistic that in the coming 2 decades, much more gains will be made in the protection of migrant workers. Certainly, in the meantime, I think we should pull our heads together and figure out how to fill in the cracks that are still there. It's a major issue that needs to be addressed, and it takes political will to do it. It's not technically difficult. I mean, there are so many ways of doing it and examples from other countries, but you need a political will to do it, and I think we need to work on that.
Okay, well, I think that's probably a good point to end it there, Manolo. As you said, it's time that we all need to put our heads together, and I'd like to thank our experts who have given us their thoughts today, and I'd like to remind you that we'd like you to come and put your heads together with us too. You'll be able to take part in this debate online at www.apmagnet, that's magnet.ilo.org. The online discussion will be running until the 22nd of March, and we look forward to seeing your questions and your answers and your inputs. So thank you very much from us here in Bangkok. It's bye for now.
This has been an APMagNet production.